Brock Purdy was selected as the final pick of the 2022 draft and was labeled that year's Mr. Irrelevant.
And we've saved the best till last.
He was seen as nothing more than a quick gimmick, and that couldn't have been any further from the truth. In just his second year, Purdy had led the 49ers to the biggest stage of football, the Super Bowl. He's put up some MVP caliber numbers, and yet he's still being doubted, being called nothing more than a
game managers. They're not difference makers.
But honestly, it's been happening his whole life. Despite breaking records and putting up seasons where he's had almost 70 touchdowns, people have always been there to tell him that he's nothing special. So what made everyone completely overlook Purdy his entire career, and how did he prove everyone wrong and lead the 49ers to a Super Bowl in only a second year? Brock Purdy had dreams to play in the NFL since he was only 5 years old. These dreams would come from watching mainly one player, Tim Tebow with the Florida Gators. He was fascinated with the atmosphere, the fans, and the pressure that came with being a quarterback. Purdy would learn how to throw a football from his father, who was a huge fan of Dan Marino, and it was because of him that Purdy wanted to be just like Marino growing up, which is why he wore the number 13 in high school and in the NFL. Purdy would begin attending Perry High School in Gilbert, Arizona, and would join the football team, but wouldn't be named a starter for the varsity team until his sophomore year. However, his first season would be pretty bad, throwing for over 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns, but also 11 interceptions. But this turned out to mean nothing in the end, because in the very next season, Purdy would throw for over 3,300 yards and 42 touchdowns, with again 11 interceptions. He led Perry High School to a 9-1 record and would make it all the way to the state semifinal game, but would get blown out 62-20 by the Chandler Wolves. In his senior season, he threw for over 4,400 yards, 57 touchdowns, and only 9 interceptions. But that's not all. He also ran for 1,000 more yards and 10 more touchdowns. He led the team to a 12-1 record and brought them all the way to the state championship, but would fall yet again to the Chandler Wolves, this time 42-49. Purdy in that game had almost 500 yards, 6 touchdowns, and not a single interception. Even though the season had ended on a bad note, one thing was still undeniable. Brock Purdy was really good. You would think having a monster season where he had almost 70 touchdowns and more than 5,000 yards would make you a really good player, or at least make you look like one. But scouts didn't think the same way at all. Purdy was rated only a 3-star recruit coming out of high school. He still did get a good amount of offers though, including some big name schools like Alabama and Texas A&M. When Purdy went to tour Alabama, Nick Saban told him that he was below average in height, his arm strength was whatever, and that his accuracy was average at best. On the other hand, Iowa State had sent 5 coaches to persuade Brock Purdy to go to their school, and I think it's pretty clear what he decided to commit to.
An athletic, Iowa State University.
However, he wouldn't be named a starter at Iowa State. He wasn't even the backup. He was actually the 3rd-string quarterback. He wouldn't get an opportunity until week 5, after the other 2 quarterbacks had faced injury and just overall played poorly. In Purdy's starting debut versus Oklahoma State, he completed 18 of his 23 passes for over 300 yards, 4 passing touchdowns, and also had 1 rushing touchdown. After this performance, Purdy would never sit on the bench at Iowa State again. He led the Iowa State Cyclones to a record of 6-2 in the games that he started, but his sophomore season is when he really took off, throwing for almost 4,000 yards, 27 passing touchdowns, 8 rushing touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. Purdy led the Big 12 in passing yards and had the 3rd most total touchdowns. However, Iowa State only had a record of 7-6, and the reason why is because the team just didn't have many good players. But in the 2020 season, Purdy's junior year, Iowa State would get a huge addition in running back Breece Hall. Purdy and Breece would almost single-handedly bring Iowa State to a record of 9-3, tied for the best season in school history, and at one point were ranked the 9th best team in college football, the best Iowa State had ever been ranked. In Purdy's senior season, he threw for over 3,000 yards, 19 touchdowns, and had 8 interceptions, and had an impressive 71.7 completion rate. After 4 good years in college, Brock Purdy declared for the draft, but I don't think he expected how badly he would be overlooked. NFL scouts saw Brock Purdy as a quarterback with basically no potential since he had his best season his sophomore year and supposedly never improved from that point on. He was pretty small at only 6'1". They also said that his arm talent was nothing special, no arm strength, bad release, and that he didn't really make those tight window type of throws. Not just that, his draft combine had been poor, being ranked only the 11th most athletic quarterback in that draft. And to top everything all off, it's not like Purdy had been competing against prodigy quarterbacks. He was competing with players like Sam Howell and Desmond Ridder, and he still wasn't seen as good as them. Combine all those things, and you end up being drafted as a 252nd overall pick by the 49ers, aka Mr. Irrelevant, and at that moment everyone laughed and played him off, not knowing what Purdy was actually capable of. Purdy was a third-string quarterback behind Trey Lance and Jimmy Garoppolo. Playing time was not guaranteed at all, but after both Lance and Jimmy were injured mid-season, Purdy would have to step up. He would get his opportunity in Week 13 against the 8-4 Miami Dolphins, completing 25 of his 37 attempts for 210 yards and 2 touchdowns. And in just one game, Purdy became the first Mr. Irrelevant to ever throw a touchdown. He led the 49ers to a 6-0 record to end the season and secured the 49ers a spot in the wild card. And what he did in the regular season, he would continue to do in the postseason. In the wild card game versus the Seahawks, Purdy threw for over 300 yards, had 3 passing touchdowns, 1 rushing touchdown, and no turnovers. The 49ers would make it all the way to the conference championship, but would get blown out after Purdy suffered an injury only 5 minutes into the game.
Purdy got hit on the Hassan Reddick fumble. Brock Purdy has been taken out of the game.
Oh, no.
Josh Johnson, the veteran, is in to play quarterback.
His insanity run was over, is what everyone believed.
Who do you predict will be the Week 1 starter in the Bay next year?
Trey Lance. You can't go into the year with Brock Purdy being your guy.
Contrary to what many thought, he actually proved himself as the best quarterback in training camp in the offseason. The 49ers truly believed that Purdy was their guy, and they would be right, because what he did in 2022 would be nothing compared to what he would do in 2023. In just Week 1 against the Steelers, Purdy completed 19 of his 29 throws for 220 yards and 2 touchdowns. And just like that, everyone got the feeling that what Purdy did last year maybe wasn't a fluke. In Week 4 against the Cardinals, he completed 20 of his 21 passes for 283 yards and had a completion rate of 95.2, the best by any 49ers quarterback ever in a game. Brock Purdy was really good this season, and it's no surprise he led the 49ers to a record of 12-4 before sitting out the last game of the season. He had some MVP caliber numbers, throwing for almost 4,300 yards on a 69.4 completion rate, 31 touchdowns, and 11 interceptions. And yet again, he brought the 49ers to the postseason, beating the Packers and completing a 17-point comeback against the Lions. But despite being consistently good and bringing the 49ers to the Super Bowl, many people still call him a system quarterback. The main reason for this is that Purdy has a really good team around him. Players like Christian McCaffrey, Kittle, Ayuk, and Debo, just to name a few. And on top of that, he also has a really good coach in Kyle Shanahan. People use this to discredit Purdy's success, but it's not true at all. Purdy makes some really good throws, reads defenses well, can scramble and extend plays, but no one acknowledges that. Brock Purdy has really been overlooked and doubted his whole career. After putting up a 70 touchdown season in high school, he was doubted that he would do anything in college. And in college, after putting up record-breaking numbers, NFL scouts said that he wasn't anything special. And finally, after being named the 2022 Mr. Irrelevant and going on to lead the 49ers to the Super Bowl, Brock Purdy is now being called just a game manager. This has really been the story of Purdy's football career. He's never been given credit anywhere he went. The 49ers are facing the Chiefs in a Super Bowl, and this is the ultimate test to determine if what Purdy is doing is just a product of the system he's in, or if he's capable of actually being a game changer, winning his first ever Super Bowl and potentially ending those game manager narratives.